5 days earlier. I took my lump of oak and using my table saw, I cut a 7mm slice off of it. I then cut the end off so it was 19 inches long and then cut it to a width of 57mm. I believed that sanding it flat on the sandpaper table would make the fretboard good enough, but the table saw had left some really deep saw marks in, so I needed my router table. I stuck it down with a double-sided tape and then plunged my router so it only just scratched the top of the wood. I could then wedge a feeler gauge between the depth stop, tighten it, and then when I plunged down again, it would cut only 10 thou off the top of the fretboard. This is how I get around the fact that my router doesn't have a fine adjustment on it. After I'd finished skimming over the fretboard, I rubbed it off to smooth it out. I then checked the thickness of my fretboard with a dial caliper, and oh dear, it was 40,000ths of an inch too small on the lowest corner. If you watch the jaws, you can see how much of a difference that is. For the second time, I had to throw my fretboards away and start again. I believe the trouble started with my router table. The top table is screwed down onto the 2 rails below. Just ignore the middle one, that isn't used for anything anymore and I couldn't be bothered to take it off. I use 4 bolts to hold down these lower rails, and at the base of it all is a chipboard worktop, which is perfectly flat and great for the job. There are several things that could be the problem. These bottom rails might not be flat, the top table might not be flat, and the screws holding down the table could stress it to cause it to bend even if it was flat to begin with. I used the wood from the skip, used my table saw to clean it up, and now I'm going to make some new rails from it. As you can see, the wall gets in the way, so I cannot cut these on the table saw. After dropping the wood on my foot, I could mark a centre line and then add a hole in the middle at each end of the wood. I always centre punch my holes. I first pilot drilled the wood, yet my drill couldn't travel all the way through, but that isn't a problem. I could then take an inch in diameter Forstner bit and drill just roughly to the depth of it. Now I could take my pilot drill again, put it in the gap the Forstner bit had made, wedge a piece of worktop underneath, and I am finished drilling the hole. This is a great trick for anyone with a budget drill that only has a small length of travel. To finish it off, I drilled the Forstner bits on the other side, and then finished with 11mm all the way through. This way, a 10mm bolt fits comfortably, and the head and the nut are countersunk into the wood. I then added some wooden feet to the bottom of the router table. I now have my top table and the 2 rails underneath bolted down with 4 bolts at the corners. With the feet on the router table, there was room to add these brackets with the bent over steel that hold a nut in place. These allow me to easily undo the top table to route big things like the body, and then bolt it back down again from the top to route small things like the fretboard. And finally, to finish off, with everything bolted down, I route over the top table to skim it off perfectly flat. This way, even if the side rails aren't perfectly true to the table, my worktop will be, which means everything I route will still be perfectly flat. Well, it's the last piece of oak I've actually got left, so I hope this is the final time I have to cut my fretboard. I've cut it a few millimeters larger this time, so I have a bigger margin for error. I tape one side down to my router table and skim it off so it's perfectly flat. I then sand it smooth, apply double-sided tape to the sanded side, and then do the feeler gauge trick again. Plunge the router so it only just touches the wood, loosen the depth stop, press it down onto a feeler gauge, tighten the depth stop, pull the feeler gauge out, and then plunge it down onto the depth stop. After each route, I'd check it with the dial calipers, and then keep taking cuts until it was down to the right thickness. After I'd checked it for a final time, I used my bandsaw to cut it to a width of 56mm. And now here, at the end of the video, is finally my finished fretboard blank. You know the drill. Please like, subscribe, share, comment on how I did everything wrong and that you think I'm stupid. I don't really mind. Thank you for watching. Why stood there? No. Why are you so stupid?